The day of my wedding was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway of the grand church. My heart pounded in my chest. My palms felt damp and my lips were dry. Friends and family had gathered, filling every wooden pew. Soft music drifted through the air. Elegant flowers lined the aisle, and everyone in the crowd turned their heads to see me. Yet, at that very moment, my cat, Daisy, stood on her hind legs in the middle of the aisle. She let out a long, piercing yowl that cut through the silence. She refused to move, as if she had thrown herself there with a single mission: to stop me from walking down the aisle. My cheeks grew hot, not from happiness, but from confusion and the unsettling feeling that something terrible lay ahead. Never in my life had Daisy acted like this. She was usually calm and sweet, the type of cat who curled at my feet while I sipped tea or read a book. But now, her meows sounded urgent, almost desperate. Everyone started whispering. My mother frowned. My father stepped forward, unsure whether to move the cat aside or wait for me to do something. My maid of honor, Felicia, turned to look at me with wide eyes as if asking, "What is happening?" I stared down at Daisy, my stomach twisting into knots. I tried to catch my breath. My wedding dress felt heavy on my shoulders, and my veil brushed against my face with each trembling breath. I glanced down the aisle and saw James, my soon-to-be husband. He had a look on his face that I couldn't read. Part impatience, part confusion, part something else. I clutched the handle of my bouquet until my knuckles turned white. I wondered for the first time if this was a sign, some warning I had not understood before. The air felt too thick to breathe. It was as if the whole world held its breath in that moment. Then, in the presence of all those stares, I took one shaky step forward. My father tried to help me, but Daisy did not budge. She kept yowling and blocking the path, as though guarding me from something. That's when I felt the first wave of panic. Why did Daisy seem to know something I didn't? What if she was trying to warn me? Was I about to marry someone I did not truly know? This was the moment everything changed. A few months earlier, I would have laughed at the idea that my loving cat would interrupt my wedding. I had always pictured my wedding day as the happiest day of my life. At least, that was how I had planned it with James. James and I had met at a small art gallery in my city. He was charming and tall, with a confident smile. He approached me while I was admiring a sculpture, and we started talking. He told me he was an aspiring entrepreneur. He said he was building a digital marketing business, and that he was always looking to invest in new ventures. He joked that he had approached me because I looked like someone who appreciated beauty. It sounded flattering at the time, though a bit smooth. But I was drawn in by his charisma. He asked for my phone number that evening, and I gave it to him. Soon, we were meeting for coffee, texting throughout the day, and spending weekends at restaurants around the city. He was sweet and attentive. Sometimes he showered me with flowers and small notes saying how special I was to him. He was so thoughtful, or so I believed. I had inherited a decent fortune from my grandmother, along with her cozy house in the countryside. My grandmother had always been wise with her money, and she had taught me a lot about finances. I was not reckless with my inheritance, but James convinced me that, together, we could make my money grow. He talked about starting businesses and investing in property. Every time he brought these ideas up, I felt a tiny tug in my heart that maybe I should be more cautious. But he was so persuasive. He made me feel like we were in it together. My cat, Daisy, was usually calm around guests. She was a rescue cat I had adopted 3 years ago. Daisy was quite social for a cat, often rubbing against people's ankles and purring for attention. But whenever James came around, Daisy acted strangely. She would keep her distance, and sometimes hiss if he tried to pick her up. I shrugged it off as Daisy just being protective. After all, she was used to having me all to herself. However, at times, I would notice Daisy staring at James with this intense, wary look. It was unsettling. Despite Daisy's strange reactions, I fell deeper into my relationship with James. He proposed to me on a warm summer night under fairy lights in our backyard. The proposal was picturesque. He knelt on one knee, a small velvet box in his hand, and asked me to marry him. I said yes without hesitation. There was no question in my mind at that moment. I believed I loved him. I believed that if we were truly meant to be together, Daisy would eventually warm up to him. We set our wedding date for early autumn, just a few months away. There was a rush of excitement as we planned the flowers, the reception, and the guest list. James insisted on a big wedding at the grand church in the city. He said that if we were to celebrate our love, we should do it in style. Although I preferred something small and simple, I let him have his way. I wanted him to feel proud and involved. As the wedding drew closer, my cat's behavior grew worse. Daisy would hide whenever James visited. She refused to eat if he was in the house. Sometimes, I heard her growling from a corner. James would get annoyed. "Your cat hates me," he would say. "Maybe you should keep her locked away on our wedding day. We don't want her causing a scene." He said it with a laugh, but I sensed a trace of impatience. I tried to ignore that uneasy feeling in my gut. I also noticed that James was pressuring me to finalize certain legal documents related to my house and inheritance. He said it would be easier for us to manage things after we were married if we got the paperwork sorted early. I figured this was normal. After all, couples often merge finances, sign prenuptial agreements, and arrange ownership details. He seemed prepared. I thought this was a good sign. He was serious about our future. But now and then, I caught a glimpse of a certain look in his eyes. It was as if his mind was racing, plotting something I was not fully aware of. The day of the wedding arrived faster than I ever dreamed. I woke up that morning full of nervous excitement. My mother, father, and maid of honor stayed with me as I got ready. The hair stylist pinned my hair back and placed little flowers in it. The makeup artist gave me a soft, natural look. My wedding gown was off-white with delicate lace. I felt beautiful. Yet deep inside, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. My parents assumed it was normal pre-wedding jitters. I tried to believe that. Everyone left for the church ahead of me, except for Felicia, who stayed behind to help me gather my things. Daisy stayed by my side, weaving between my legs as I moved around. She looked anxious. I knelt down to pet her, and she let out a sad little meow that seemed to say, "Don't go." It tugged at my heart, but I told her I had to. I was about to start a new life. That is how I found myself at the church doorway, trembling, with Daisy suddenly in the middle of the aisle. A hush fell over the church. The music stopped playing. Everyone turned in their seats, confused. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to gently call Daisy to me, but she only yowled and hissed if I stepped forward. My mother's face was pale. James stood at the altar, looking annoyed. He gave a small gesture to the priest to see if the ceremony could continue. But something in Daisy's eyes made me pause. I didn't want to force her aside. My father leaned in and whispered, "Should I move her out of the way?" But I shook my head. I stepped forward slowly, feeling a strange sense of dread. At that moment, Daisy darted toward me and grabbed at the edge of my dress with her claws, meowing in a deep, distressed tone. That sound made me stop. My heart pounded. It wasn't normal cat behavior. It was as if Daisy was screaming for me not to proceed. Then, she circled around to the side and began pawing at my small purse, which was hung around my shoulder. Inside that purse, I carried all sorts of wedding day necessities, tissues, safety pins, and my phone. I thought about how Daisy always seemed to scratch or paw at things she wanted me to notice. Maybe there was something in my purse. Feeling embarrassed in front of all my guests, I quickly knelt down. My dress rustled. I rummaged through my purse. I expected nothing but a few small items, yet my hand brushed against something I didn't recognize. A folded piece of paper. I frowned. When had I placed that there? Or had someone else slipped it in? Trying not to draw too much attention, I quietly opened the note. My eyes scanned the words, and my breath caught in my throat. It was an email printout, one I had never seen before. It was from James to another person named Leo. They were discussing how James would gain access to my finances after the wedding. They mentioned property, bank details, and a plan to manipulate me into investing my money into some shady scheme that would only benefit James. He was boasting about how gullible I was, how I trusted him blindly, and that soon he would have control over everything. My face turned pale. My hand, holding the paper, shook. My mind raced with confusion, anger, and heartbreak. How had this letter gotten into my purse? And who was Leo? Was this a cruel joke? I glanced down at Daisy, who was now watching me with wide, concerned eyes. I realized that Daisy's actions had led me to find this piece of paper. The church was silent. I felt hundreds of eyes on me. My mother was about to approach me, but I raised my hand to stop her. Slowly, I stood up. My legs felt weak, as if they might give out any second. I forced myself to look at James. Even from across the aisle, I could see his face changing. He looked alarmed. He must have recognized the piece of paper in my hand. A shiver of realization shot down my spine. My sweet, protective cat had just saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. Daisy had sensed something was wrong. She had stopped me from walking down the aisle to a man who planned to ruin me for his own gain. The crowd began to murmur. James tried to put on a calm face, though I could see the panic underneath. He extended his arms as if beckoning me forward, trying to play the clueless, loving groom. But it was too late. The evidence in my hands was undeniable. Taking a shaky breath, I turned to face the guests. My voice trembled. "I'm sorry, everyone," I began. "But there's been a terrible misunderstanding." I looked down at the note in my hand, then glanced again at James. Or rather, a revelation. My mother rushed up to me, her eyes full of worry. I handed her the paper, and she read it. Her expression changed from confusion to shock, then to anger. She passed it to my father, who looked as if he was about to explode in fury. Meanwhile, James remained standing at the altar, though he looked ready to bolt. "James," I said, my voice echoing in the silence. "Care to explain what this is?" My hand shook as I held up the email printout. He cleared his throat, his face turning red. "That's nothing," he said, feigning confidence. "Someone's playing a sick joke. You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." He tried to give me a winning smile, but my eyes brimmed with tears. "Then why is your name on it?" I asked, my voice louder now. "Why is there talk of my money? My house? Why are you bragging about controlling everything I own?" People in the crowd began to gasp. My closest friends looked stunned. Felicia stood by my side, her mouth slightly open, wanting to support me but not sure what to do next. James tried to defend himself. "It's forged. You can't believe this. Trust me." He stepped down from the altar and tried to approach me. But my father moved in front of me, blocking him. I realized that everything was crumbling. The relationship I believed was built on love and trust was a fraud. He was after my wealth all along. My cat had sensed it. If not for Daisy's intervention, I would have walked down the aisle and signed over my life to this man. Guests started talking among themselves. The priest looked uncomfortable, stepping back to give us space. Some friends were in shock, while others started murmuring that they had suspected something about James. But none had dared speak up, thinking I was in love and wouldn't believe them. I felt a surge of betrayal. I confronted James one last time, holding the paper in front of his face. "You lied to me," I whispered. "You planned to use me." Anger and sadness warred inside my chest. I thought of all the gentle moments we'd shared, all the kind words he'd spoken. Every single one seemed fake now. I was left feeling empty, like I had been robbed of something precious, the ability to trust. James, cornered, dropped his fake smile. He glanced at the note, then at me. His eyes were cold. I saw his real self in that moment. There was no warmth, no regret, only irritation that his scheme had been exposed. He turned as if to leave. But my father grabbed his arm, not allowing him to flee. "You'll explain yourself to her," my father said in a stern voice. A hush fell over the church again as James looked around. With everyone watching, he tried one last trick. "I'm sorry," he muttered. I needed money. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I do have some feelings for you." But I saw the lie. He was only trying to save face. I stepped back, tears running down my cheeks. Daisy rubbed against my legs, purring softly as if trying to comfort me. Felicia put her arms around my shoulders. My mother's eyes glittered with anger and sorrow, but she stayed silent, letting me handle the moment. "I want you out of my life," I said to James, my voice shaking. "This wedding is off. Do not contact me again. I'm going to have someone investigate your business dealings. If you've done anything illegal, you'll face the consequences." James tried to say something, but the noise in the church rose. People began yelling their opinions, some telling him to leave, others cursing him. Realizing he had lost, James yanked his arm free of my father's grip and hurried down the aisle. He shoved open the doors and disappeared outside without so much as a backward glance. I stood there, stunned, in my wedding gown. The heartbreak was overwhelming, but so was the sense of relief. I hadn't married that man. I was saved from a life of manipulation and lies, thanks to Daisy's strange behavior. The scene at the church was chaos. Guests were unsettled. Some cried, others tried to comfort me. My parents shielded me from too many questions, guiding me to a private room at the back of the church. My eyes stung from tears, and I clutched Daisy in my arms. Normally, she hated being carried, but that day she allowed it. It was as if she knew I needed her warmth. I sat down on a small bench in the dressing room. Felicia and my mother stood on either side of me, offering quiet support. My father paced back and forth, still furious, and muttering that he wished he could teach James a lesson. I was in shock, replaying the events in my mind over and over. Some time later, the priest knocked gently on the door. I straightened up, trying to compose myself. I expected him to apologize for the scene or offer words of comfort. But to my surprise, he brought me another note, this time from a neighbor who had rushed to the church as soon as she'd heard. She had found other suspicious documents James had hidden in a corner of my garage. She didn't know what they meant, but she thought I should see them. I glanced at them, though my hands trembled. They were full of details about my grandmother's estate, shares in certain companies, and large figures that James must have planned to transfer to himself. A wave of disgust and fear washed over me. How had I not seen this side of him before? But at the same time, gratitude filled me because somehow fate, or Daisy, had intervened before it was too late. The guests began to filter out of the church. Some left quietly. Some tried to tell me how sorry they were. I was grateful for their concern, but all I wanted was to go home. The wedding was clearly canceled. My mother helped me change into more comfortable clothes, while Felicia talked to the catering staff about what to do with the reception meal. We decided to turn the would-be wedding reception into a small gathering for friends and family who stayed. They had come from far away, after all. We figured we could still spend time together, share the meal, and support each other in the aftermath. I took Daisy home in my arms. I arrived at my grandmother's old house, still wearing a tear-stained face and a heavy heart. The place felt empty, without the presence of wedding excitement. Yet there was a sense of peace knowing James was no longer welcome. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and canceled wedding arrangements. I filed the paperwork to protect my assets. I blocked James's number. I even hired a private investigator to find out if James had pulled this trick on anyone else. The detective soon discovered that James had a history of conning people. He had never stayed with one identity for long. He used multiple aliases and had cheated several women out of their savings. I felt sick to my stomach hearing that. At the same time, I felt a sense of relief that I had escaped him. Daisy remained by my side throughout. She was calm again, back to her usual self, purring in my lap when I felt down. I realized she must have found or smelled those hidden documents that James slipped into my purse. Maybe she had seen James put them there and tried to warn me. Regardless of how she did it, she saved me. I spoiled her with new toys and treats. She soaked up all the love, happy to see me smiling again. The neighbors, my parents, and my close friends all came together to show support. Felicia stayed with me some nights, just to keep me company. The heartbreak was real. Even though James had been a liar, I still felt the pain of betrayal. Love, even when it is built on lies, can leave deep wounds. But each day, the weight on my chest lifted a little. I began seeing a counselor. She helped me process my emotions. I cried many times, feeling foolish for having trusted James so blindly. But the counselor reminded me that people like James are very skilled at deceit. It wasn't my fault that I believed in a love that turned out to be false. I also dedicated more time to my own passions. My grandmother had always encouraged me to find something meaningful to do with my inheritance. I decided to create a small charity for rescuing animals, especially cats, in honor of Daisy. I called it Daisy's Heart, and we opened a local shelter that helped abandoned animals find loving homes. Working on this project gave me purpose. It helped me turn a painful experience into something good for others. Eventually, through these efforts, I met someone new. I did not rush into another relationship, but I formed a friendship with a veterinarian named Alan. We first got acquainted when he came to volunteer at the shelter. Alan was gentle and kind. He had a quiet sense of humor and a great love for animals. Each time he saw Daisy, he joked about how she should be my security guard. I felt my heart opening up to him in a way that surprised me. But I took it slow. We spent time at the shelter talking about our dreams and our pasts. He told me about how he became a vet because he wanted to help creatures who couldn't help themselves. I told him about my grandmother, her love for animals, and how Daisy saved me on my wedding day. Alan listened with sympathy, never once judging me for what had happened. When the time felt right, I asked him if he would like to come to my house for dinner. He said yes. The night was simple and sweet. Daisy gave her full approval by rubbing against his ankles and purring for attention. After we finished dinner, Alan helped me wash the dishes, and we talked late into the night. There was no deception in his eyes, just genuine interest. Over the next few months, as Daisy's heart grew, so did my bond with Alan. He showed me that there are good people in the world, people who don't care about how much money you have, but about who you are. I realized my heart had healed enough to trust again. I wasn't rushing to the altar or making grand plans, but I felt hope blossoming inside me. My parents were happy to see me smiling again. My father would sometimes tease me, saying, "I'm going to have Daisy approve any future boyfriends." We would laugh, but beneath the joke, I knew it was half serious. Daisy's instincts had proven priceless. Meanwhile, James's story ended when the private investigator found enough evidence to link him to multiple fraud cases. He was caught by the police when he tried to con another woman. Though it took some time, I was able to recover most of the money he had managed to trick me into investing in his name. The authorities assured me he would be behind bars for a while. Knowing that he couldn't harm anyone else gave me closure. One bright morning, about a year after the canceled wedding, I walked through the garden of my grandmother's house. Flowers were in full bloom, and the sun touched everything with golden light. Daisy pranced around my feet, chasing a butterfly. I bent to pick her up. She snuggled against me, her soft purr vibrating in my arms. That moment reminded me of my wedding day, the day Daisy stood in my path, refusing to let me walk down an aisle that would have led me to heartbreak and ruin. Thinking back on it still made me shudder at the close call, but gratitude flooded my heart. I was safe, free, and stronger. In the distance, Alan appeared through the garden gate. He had a notebook under one arm and waved at me. We were going to spend the day at the animal shelter together, meeting new volunteers and finalizing plans for an upcoming fundraiser. The sight of him filled me with calm and warmth. Daisy meowed to greet him. He smiled and scratched her head, earning a happy purr. I saw the kindness in his eyes, the honesty in his smile. My heart felt light. I realized that even though I had faced betrayal, I was still capable of finding genuine love. Yes, I had been hurt. The man I almost married was a fraud and a manipulator, out to steal the fortune my grandmother had left me. But because of Daisy's strange behavior that day, her unwavering determination to block me from the altar, I escaped a terrible fate. And I found a new path that led me toward true fulfillment. Sometimes, the darkest moments of our lives lead us to see the brightest truths. I discovered who James really was. I also discovered my own strength. I built a shelter that changed many animals' lives. and I opened my heart to someone who truly cared about me for who I was. When Alan reached me, he leaned in and kissed my cheek. I smiled a genuine, peaceful smile. We all headed to the car, Alan, Daisy, and me, ready to start our day at the shelter. In my mind, I could still hear the echo of church bells and see that long, flower-lined aisle. I would always remember the feeling of standing there, paralyzed by shock and fear. Yet, I would also remember how it led me to a brighter future. Daisy had shown me the truth. Thanks to her, I was standing in a place of hope and new beginnings. No matter what hardships came my way, I was no longer afraid. I had faced betrayal and come out stronger. My friends and family stood by my side. Daisy curled by my feet at night, reassuring me that I was safe. And Alan held my hand, never asking for anything but my trust. The chapter with James was over, but it taught me the most important lesson. Love cannot be built on lies, and true joy comes from honesty, kindness, and understanding. For the rest of my life, I would carry that lesson with me. Whenever I wondered if I should trust someone, I would remember Daisy's brave stand in the church aisle. In that single moment, she protected me more than any wealth or contract ever could. As I held Daisy and felt her purr against my chest, I knew that in the end, I had found my happy ending. It might not have been the one I had planned, but it was the one I needed. One filled with real love, genuine friendships, and a future I could look forward to with a joyful heart. Thank you so much for reading my story and being part of this journey. Your support means everything to me. Please keep subscribing, commenting, and liking. You make all of this possible. Your feedback not only helps me grow, but also inspires me to create more stories that you'll enjoy. Every comment and share allows us to reach new readers, and I'm truly grateful for your continued encouragement. I look forward to bringing you more exciting tales, and I hope you'll stay with me every step of the way. Thank you again for your wonderful support.